So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's GINGR webinar, Accelerating Electricity Grid Deployment and how to integrate this nature positive, social positive from the beginning onwards. Glad that so many people are joining today, and we're looking forward to have an interesting discussion. Before we start, my name is Annika Liljestam. I'm the coordinator of GINGR, the Global Initiative for Nature, Grids and Renewables. And I'm working here with my colleagues at the Renewables Grid Initiative. If you can, please have your camera on because it helps us to have a nice conversation later. Also, we would like to ask you to have your name and organization in your name. We will have a Q&A session later. It would be great if you can put your questions in the chat box while we have the presentations. And as you've already noticed, probably this session is being recorded. To get a sense of who we're talking to with today, it would be great if you could start and describe in the chat box briefly where you're joining us from today. So we have a little bit of an overview from around the globe to see who's interested in our topic and also to see your institution. This would be really nice. Thank you so much. And then, just to inform you, this webinar is building on GINGR's latest publication, our white paper on guiding principles to integrate climate, biodiversity, and social goals. And you can see both authors of this paper here on the call. They will both be talking later. Someone is not mute. Okay, so as you know, electricity grids are expanding around the world, and we increasingly face a shared challenge. And what is this challenge? So the infrastructure that we all need for the energy transition also comes with the challenge that we need to protect the biodiversity, respect the local values and the societies living in the infrastructure area. And how can we then also strengthen the community trust? So this is what today's discussion will explore. And I'm delighted to be joined by the following three speakers. So there's Antonella Battaglini. She is the CEO of Renewables Grid Initiative. Then we have Adrián Maté, my colleague from Spain, our environmental coordinator. And we have Cíara Taberner from National Grid, UK, who will then have a look at the practitioner's perspective on this topic. So thanks for joining us. And now a quick look at the agenda. You can see the agenda is packed and we only have 1 hour, so I want to make this quick. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to share these questions in the chat box. And without further ado, I would like to ask Antonella to set the scene. Antonella will help us understand why grids are becoming one of the defining challenges of the energy transition, and why integrating nature and social considerations from the start is becoming increasingly important. So Antonella, over to you.
Thank you, Annika, and welcome everybody. I'm not sure who you are, but definitely grids have become a key priority, political priority around the globe. In Europe, we have one of the most sophisticated grid system in the world. We have started to build this system many years ago, decades ago. And now we are still in the need of expanding, upgrading, and digitalizing that. So first of all, who is Renewables Grid Initiative? The organization that I represent and lead is an association of transmission system operators and climate and environmental NGOs coming from across Europe. We have also some supporting members, including suppliers like Europa Cable and T&D Europe, and IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, with whom we lead the project GINGR, the Global Initiative for Nature, Grids and Renewable. Why an organization like RGI, which is rather small, team up with a big organization like IUCN is very simple. We realized that the massive buildup of energy infrastructure, and we focus exclusively on renewables and grids, needs to be done having nature and people positive goals in mind and in the planning. And therefore, GINGR aims at developing monitoring and reporting systems that are globally aligned and standardized. The work that we do on the electricity grid infrastructure is part of the GINGR project, but not only, because it is embedded fully in the RGI activities. And I invite you to look at the RGI web page. Annika can put it in the chat, the link, where you will find a huge amount of resources that we have collected in the past 17 years. So why grids are important? You know probably very well that the energy transition is well underway. The reason for decarbonizing are linked to climate change for sure, but increasingly also to energy security, energy independency, and the level of expansions of mainly solar and wind are massive, and 2025 was the year where investments in renewable energies have been higher than any other technology, generation technologies. However, you can build renewables fast, but if you do not connect them to the electricity grids, well, I'm afraid that this is going to be only stranded assets. Indeed, building the grids not only is essential to integrate these large shares of renewables, but it is also instrumental to deliver the generated electricity from where it is generated to the areas where it is going to be consumed. And sometimes these locations are very far apart from each other. Moreover, we have different patterns in generation. So having a large grid, and here what you see in the slide is the European grid, which is very crowded, I must say. So to smooth the demand, a large grid is very much needed. Of course, another main reason for expanding the grid is the need to accelerate electrification. We need to electrify not only to decarbonize, but also to save energy, primary energy, because electricity is the most efficient fuel that we have at our disposal. Of course, there are huge challenges in building grids. We are not looking at technical challenges in this webinar. However, there is plenty of resources you can access on the RGI webpage on that. And we will look mainly what are the challenges that are being faced by project developers. Of course, there is a financial challenge that changes across regions. Some regions are easier, project developers have more means and easier patterns to access capital, but in other regions can be very complicated. Apart from that, I think everywhere there is an increasing awareness that the permitting procedures are not only long and complex, sometimes they seem to be perceived as one of the main bottlenecks of building grids. Of course, if you are a project developer or you are interested in expanding the grid, it's quite straightforward that you want to build as fast as possible. But whenever you build something, you build it in nature and next to some people. So you need to somehow consider how to balance different interest groups rightly from the beginning. Moreover, biodiversity protection is regulated in many countries, rightly so. And so compliance with regulatory asks is very much needed. Addressing community concern is also super important. I mentioned you build it always next to someone. And if you don't have public acceptance for the infrastructure, it becomes really difficult to actually deliver your project in time. Very often we see that data on ecological data, but also social data is missing or is not easily accessible. And this data access or data availability is considered one of the main burden that has to be dealt with. And because we want to expand so fast, obviously there is a huge competition that is going on in terms of competing for land, competing for staff, personnel, experts, knowledge, expertise. And this creates an overall complex system that needs to be managed right from the onset of the planning phases, so that environmental, social, economic, financial, and technical aspects can be looked at in parallel and not as a sequential or second thoughts. So with this, I believe that my key message is that when the planning process is used as a tool to embed nature and people concern, you will end up with a much stronger project, definitely a better project, which not only delivered the main purpose, which is transmitting electricity, but also contributes to creating local benefit, provides nature enhancement, and even benefits to the environment and the ecosystems that it crosses. So building grids in this way will allow to develop contribution towards what we call nature and people positive. So my colleague Adrián will bring you into the details of the white paper that we wrote together, highlighting the 3 guiding principles, and then we can continue from there. Thank you.
Thanks. I will not speak much. Adrián, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Annika. Thank you, Antonella. Yeah, so when we wrote this paper, we had everything in mind, but we also wanted to have like a perspective from the past. And this perspective from the past comes from already 1959, when a landscape architect or urban planner, Sir William Holford, he basically wrote how grids should look like, how should be planned in the UK. And he came up with like 7 key principles, which were then were refined further in 1992 by National Grid here today. They did this for the whole rock rules. And then we, as an expansion, let's say, as the evolution of history, we came up with these 3 guiding principles. Let's go for each of these principles because they are very common sense in a way. So William Holford says, like, avoid major high amenity areas. Don't go there. Bypass any smaller sensitive areas. Keep route direct simple. Use natural backgrounds, means that put the grids in the background. or even places where they have nice hilly or forested areas. Avoid forming wirescapes, which means like having many wires all around the place, and use the right approach for residential. So if you are in a residential or in the industrial area, perhaps it's the right place to go underground, not above ground, and vice versa. For the substations in 1992, it was pretty much similar common sense principles, but more aligned into the project, into the site. And the additionality was the people, the communities. And as GINGR, we take these perspectives. We also take perspectives from other parts of the planet, from our own members, and we said, let's bring up 3 principles, which are the following 3. Could be 12, the 13, and the 14th. But they are integrating ecology and ecosystem services into grid planning. This is number 1. The second is early engagement, transparency, and legitimacy is number 2. And the third is adaptive governance based in local knowledge. So let's go into the first principle. This principle, what it says is that we need to basically integrate ecosystem services. And ecosystem services, which is could be a complex definition, but if we take it within the right sense, we would just need to use what the nature offers us to make a better design for the grid system. And this is basically because we need to protect our environment, our natural environment. And we have lots of data. We have data from migratory patterns from avian species. We have habitat maps. We can also find out the symbolic species when we go into the field, and that will allow us to plan better our projects, especially in the planning phase. Then we have a lot of tools. We have GIS, remote sensing. Today we have we have drones with LiDAR assistance. We have lots of technologies for our own benefit, which we could also use to avoid or perhaps design out biodiversity or socio-ecological conflicts, something that is also called implementation resistance or political resistance in a way. And the third is, that will allow us to speed up the permitting time, to reduce the number of claims, litigations, and last-minute surprises. So when we imagine that we are doing all these things together, we ask ourselves that perhaps we should start thinking of new ways of defining the CBA, the cost-benefit analysis of grids, if we take into account these externalities. And also another important fact from the second principle perspective as well, which is sorry, Annika, which is that the grids become assets. They are not just wires. They are becoming landscape assets. They are very key, important, strong financial, social, political assets. And this is a key in the reasoning of GINGR. So we need to shift the perceptions from just delivering grids as a constraint to making them an opportunity. And we have in the next slides now a few examples, which are in the left side, we have the possibility to connect corridors, connect biodiversity areas from point A to point B. We had a webinar last year where we explained also things related to the land ownership, what happens to the asset, to the land, from a bee farming perspective, from the owner perspective, if they are allowed the possibility to do beekeeping practices. Or what happens when we go to with our daughter and we walk around and take her to a place where you have horses, you have kids, and everything happens beneath this space. So we have recreation, cultural ecosystem services in there as well. So this is principle 1. Principle 2 connects us to something a bit more complex, but very important from a legal perspective as well. And this is the social license and the community benefits, because these two are related to sometimes what is putting projects to a stop, to a halt, to an end. And we don't want this. So again, in 2015, RGI, they ran a project called Best Grid, where they did uncover lots of ways to approach people, to do early engagement forums, to find which would be the most beneficial format to do so, whether it's a fishbowl event or something else. And the idea was to uncover social, cultural, and environmental issues, because we want something, which is great, but we want something even more not to happen, which is the public disengagement from consultations. We want people to assist, not to assist. So this is going to be very crucial if we want to improve the project's credibility, the social resilience, and we would be now starting to speak words which are very fashionable, let's say, but they are very meaningful and important, which are trust, inclusiveness, affordability, equity, and justice. So if we want to build community benefits, we have to stop looking only at the economical side of it. We have to start looking at ways where we can deliver nature-related benefits that are non-crucially only financial. And that's done thanks to the principle 2 and all the principles, which are integrating the ecosystem services, integrating the stakeholders, so they can become co-authors and act as co-designers of grids. And this is explained also in another second slide, which is the next slide, which is what happens when we approach grid design from the perspective of ecosystem service justice. So we have three things we can do. The first is we value identities, and that's not only the identity of a place, but it's also the race, ethnicity, its income, their values, their knowledge, and that will lead us to the procedural justice principle, which is our project or your project has informed everyone. Everyone had their chance. Everyone had its voice in the process. The second one is stakeholders are part of decision making, which means this is connected to the distributional justice principle, which is that all benefits and also impacts have been distributed locally, and everyone is informed. And the third one is that make it inclusive. So you have to explain the decisions and you have to explain your trade-offs. So you basically recognize that your project becomes an asset, which is the idea which I explained in previous slide, and that recognizes the vulnerability, the accessibility, and the capability of people to interact, to basically to interact with a portion of land, with that right of way. So when you do all these things, this is called systemic equity. I'm not going into this now, but basically the idea is to have this as an iterative process. So you can start looking at your grid plan design from this principle 2 aspect, because at the end you want to deliver legitimacy as a project developer. And then is the last one, which is principle 3. Sorry. Yeah, principle thing. I think it's a slide missing, maybe. Yeah, I think it's fine. Principle 3 is what we call it adaptive management. Just stay in the next slide, Annika. It's fine. In the following, yeah. So adaptive governance is based in local knowledge, which is what we did when we ran early engagement stakeholder processes, and this means that you need to talk. You need to talk to people at the very beginning, during the planning phase, during the construction phase, but also after the commissioning or repowering. And this is explained mainly because when you do this early engagement stakeholder processes, you will find out a lot of information that has been uncovered. For example, maybe some seasonal migratory movements from these species will allow you to plan your grids in the right area. You may use some customary land use practices, or you may use some cultural important sites which were not seen before, some sacred sites, forests, churches. And the idea is that all this knowledge that is captured at this stage is going to be also very informative for what everyone talks today about, which is nature-based solutions. So you can plan your grid not only for a regulatory purpose, but also for climate change adaptation. So you can prevent your grid from your pylons from desert encroachment, or from or from floods, or from wind speeds, and so on, and would prevent your project from this paralysis by analysis. So you prevent the paralyzation of the project because you are able to analyze what these impacts are, thanks to the early knowledge that you capture from talking to the people at the very beginning. And this is, as I said before, this is an iterative process, so it's key is kept being informed all the time. And this slide is taking the example of what happens if we go into a site before construction and we have a bird collision risk. Maybe the local knowledge and the data that we have says it's fine. It's nothing major. Then after commissioning, then the monitoring that we are doing, as we have integrated in Principle 1 ecosystem services, then we realized that we had higher than expected mortality. And this is the slide of dangerous skies. This is why we have to then adapt ourselves to respond, and we would then maybe implement changes in the vegetation management, or we may implement wire markers. And that would be the idea of Safe Line for Birds project, which is another initiative that we have at RGI, and that is connected to, at the end, the improvement of the ecosystem services. So through adaptation, through monitoring and adaptation, we came from a problem into a solution, and turning ecosystem services into into something that we can value and explain to the regulator, to the financial authority, to the municipality. And this example is great here because it's actually, I put it this morning, and this is for first time. It's in China. They have seen an endangered oriental stork that has been spotted raising chicks in Chao Lake, and this is from People's Daily last month. So this is the idea of principle 3. In the next slide, we also think that all these 3 principles, they can be applied across the entire planning process. So whether you are a government and you want to talk about strategic spatial planning, whether you are and decide how is your available land and which space should you allocate in the future for grids or for renewables, although it is not always done. Or you may be in a later stage and you would like to do a strategic environmental assessment, or you are in the final routing assessment, which is perhaps what we have been discussing more today. This chart explains the routing objective. So from the very first idea into the different exchanges with the public, to then capture and gain all this knowledge, all these principles are applied simultaneously, and we therefore can run through the different steps that are required in the development of a project. So for defining your route, which would be the most preferred route, A, B, or C, and how would you may have to modify your different alternatives after you engage with the public, after you think about distributional, procedural, and recognition justice, and how would that impact the initial design, and what will be the final design look like. So your baseline is in there. It's not just a biodiversity baseline, but it's also a social baseline, and that connects you to your almost last stage, which is the stage 2, the environmental impact assessment, or which is also should be called, and sometimes is called, the environmental and social impact assessment. And this is very important because also when I've reviewed lots of literature, most of the baseline impacts are biased towards vegetation and bird impacts. They have not taken into account impacts from other mammals or reptiles or amphibians, which are also symbolic and informative for our planning, for caring for the communities, for the people. So this idea, this slide explains the conventional approach of when we think about energy systems grid planning from a financial perspective, from a physical, let's say, engineering-based perspective, into a broader approach, where we take into account the people and the biodiversity altogether, of course, including the system planning. And the last slide, I think it's basically there's a bit with a bit zooming in a bit better. The previous one explains this, and then the fact that we move from the very first Holford into the GINGR principles throughout the whole rock attributed to National Grid's improvements in substations and siting. We have now all the potential information to plan better the grids, and that will connect us to Cíara, that she will be talking about her strategic environmental and social plan for the following 7 years, I think. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adrián. So just for your information, we will share the slides also on our webpage, and we will then include the updated slide deck, including the slide on Principle 3. Apologies for that. There was along the way it went.
It's fine.
It got lost. But now, of course, principles become meaningful when they can be applied in real life. So we're looking forward to have Cíara explaining to us your experiences from National Grid electricity transmission, and excited to learn your practitioner's perspective. And yes, to the audience, please feel free to start posting questions so we can have a good discussion later on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks for that intro. My name is Cíara Taberner. I'm Director of Safety, Health, Environment and Communities at National Grid. And that's probably a good place to start, because that title and the title of the part of the business I work in, we thought a lot about how do we talk about it, because I'm also responsible for quality. So the kind of normal thing was to add quality into the title, but we made a decision a few years ago to add in communities instead, because of the importance of that in relation to how we're building our network going forward. So just to start then, a really quick recap on who we are. Part of the National Grid Group, we own and maintain the high voltage system in England and Wales, and there's some detail there in relation to the size and the kind of details on our assets. But what the important thing on this one is, we're at the start of a huge transformation in our network. In April this year, we started delivery of our RIIO-T3 business plan, and that plan represents a grid upgrade at a pace and scale not seen since way back when we were talking about the Holford era in the 50s. So we haven't seen this kind of pace and scale since then. Delivery of that plan is fundamental to the UK government's Clean Power 2030 mission, and also one of the key missions for the government's parliament. We've got 35 million to spend in this regulatory period, which includes 19 billion to increase network capacity, 7 billion for new customers connect to the grid, and 6 billion on the health of the network itself, so keeping it reliable and fit for the future. And as part of that money, we have £1 billion approved via Ofgem to ensure we deliver in a way that's sustainable and socially responsible. That £1 billion will cover things like biodiversity net gain, low carbon materials to build the new system, and improving the efficiency of our existing assets. So moving on to the approach. So how do we make that approach work in reality? So the first is focused on our approach to consenting. That sets the way we build new infrastructure, including how we integrate environmental features into decision making and incorporate our stakeholder feedback into the design. It also incorporates the Holford rules, and I'm not going to go through them because we've just seen that in detail. And then the third one is our stakeholder community and amenity policy. That sets out our commitments under the Electricity Act. We consult with impacted parties and environmental groups, and we choose routes, as we spoke about before, that minimise that landscape impact and mitigate and deliver enhancements associated with the work. And finally, our social and environmental action plan. This sets out our strategy for delivering our sustainability ambitions. It encompasses things like how we design and deliver our assets, but also how we manage our existing network. That document is a license requirement, and we have to report on that annually. It sets out 28 commitments across 4 pillars, and they have been developed based on extensive stakeholder engagement. And it's all about the most material environmental impacts that we have as a business and the external policy landscape that shapes that. So this is a quick run through the 4 pillars of the plan. But most importantly, we've now integrated social value into the plan, which we feel is a really important addition. Traditionally, our environmental action plan focused on climate, on nature and resource use, and rightly so. But we recognised that we couldn't talk about responsible delivery without also talking about the impact that we were having on people and communities. Social value is about making sure the work we do creates fair and lasting benefits, whether that's through local jobs and skills, supporting diverse supply chains, or leaving a positive legacy in the communities that we operate. Social and environmental outcomes are deeply connected. We're making sure that people are considered alongside cost, safety, and sustainability, not as an afterthought, but as a core part of how we plan and operate. And here's just a little bit more about the 4 pillars, so you can see them across the top there. Key to our nature positive commitment is delivering high integrity outcomes aligned with local priorities that deliver lasting benefits for nature and communities. Our One Planet Living commitments are about avoiding overconsumption and designing out waste. We think that's going to be very important as we deliver our programme, and we know that there's already potential global supply chain shortages for some of our key materials. Climate action is about reducing our operational emissions and working to reduce the emissions associated with the construction of the new assets and delivery of the upgrade, our Scope 3 emissions. And finally, social value, recognising that huge investment programmes does have impact on people and communities, but these can be positive if we deliver them in the right way and if we're purposeful about how we spend that money. So how do we align then to the GINGR principles? So I'm not going to go through this in detail because we've heard a lot about them on this presentation, but just a few areas that we focus on. Avoiding internationally designated landscapes, habitats or heritage sites. Applying routing principles that we spoke about before to minimise the impact ecologically and visually. Nature, climate and communities are key considerations throughout the development process, and we make sure they're monitored and managed throughout the different stage gates of the projects. There's an environmental assessment integrated from early project development, and the top image there shows the example of that. We map habitat types onto our proposed corridors, and this mapping then can be used to refine the route if we see greater impact. We know that good routing can help avoid costly delays later, whether that is due to having to implement costly mitigation or due to stakeholder objections. And then the bottom picture is all about BNG, so biodiversity net gain proposals for one of our new substations. It shows how we've integrated some habitat areas into the final design to fulfill our BNG obligations, as well as integrating nature-based solutions into the design. We have to do a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain across the projects, and that covers 85% of our projects. where we have to do that work. And for projects where we don't have statutory duty, we adopt the same principles without having that defined target. This is a little bit about the second principle. So for us, stakeholders are local communities, but also interested groups like NGOs, for example, the Wildlife Trust and RSBP. In 2025, we launched our Carbon and Nature Framework to enable us to contract NGOs and other local groups to deliver environmental mitigation and enhancement and nature-based outcomes. This works for us because they have the local knowledge that we might not have and the contacts to be able to deliver that effectively. The top image is taken from our website, so this one here, showing an example of how our major projects, where we have online interactive mapping, which initially shows the proposed route and then is updated as the project moves on. And that bottom photo there is just on one of our schemes where it's called Eagle 2. A local catering company had operated on site a canteen. They'd grown exponentially because they were feeding more than 100 workers daily, doubling their permanent staff from 6 to 12. So that's just one of the examples of the kind of thing that we're looking at. And then our SEEP operates, the Social Environmental Action Plan, operates as a living plan. We know that the external landscape can change, so we update our plan annually to accommodate that. And one of the examples of that is our nature commitments for T2, which ended in March. We noted the trends towards needing to understand and mitigate nature impacts within the upstream supply chain. So we added a commitment to explore this into our plan and completed a project to map our most significant supply chain impacts, which we'll be building on through the T3 period. So then in summary, delivering at scale in terms of the amount of money we're having to invest, but climate, nature and communities is at the heart of what we do, engaging with stakeholders to deliver a sustainable energy transmission network that's fit for the future. Thank you. I'll just come out of that.
Thank you so much, Cíara. That was great. So there are already a lot of questions piling up. We also received questions in advance to the webinar. And maybe I think also one of the questions here in the chat is related to stakeholder engagement and people having problems with not in my backyard issues. Antonella also replied to this. But a common perception is that environmental and social considerations can slow down infrastructure development. I was just wondering, also Antonella, from all of your experiences, or Adrián, from the cases you have read, or also from someone of the audience, have you seen examples where integrating these considerations early actually helped accelerate the project delivery? Antonella, I mean, you put a case in here. It's a bit different, but maybe you have some experiences to share.
Yeah, well, what we have observed also through our members is that you can rush things and then you get stuck at the end. You're being taken to court and you never know what really you are able to start building. So investing in stakeholder engagement, in data collection, data monitoring is essential. There was one question which was already sent about the cost that of these engagement processes or nature protection processes imply for the project. And I think there is enough evidence that, of course, in absolute terms, engagement processes are costly, but vis-a-vis the cost of the investment, they are negligible. It's really essential to identify what are the investments that are needed and what are the benefits. And this usually you do it looking at the timing on when your project can become operational, so you can electrify the project. And if you are stuck at the very late stages of your project, this is really bad for all investors. The other thing is that when a project gets stuck, it's not only that project, that one project that suffers, it's the entire package or the entire investment plan that suffers, because we live in a global village. And if a project is not built well, if there is opposition in one corner, this will create a cascading effects across an entire country. So definitely we have seen that engaging early reduces legal costs, legal time, legal cases, and therefore deliver faster project.
Before I give the word to Adrián, Cíara, it would be interesting to hear you as a company, how you handle this and how can this perception actually be addressed or changed? I'm sure you have worked on this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with all that's been said so far, that the key is that early engagement, speaking with the local community, making sure we're aware of any special considerations that might be local to that area. Like I'm just thinking about one of the major projects we have at the moment where, as part of the consultation with the community, we're working with the local environment organisations and local planning authority to agree any mitigation on particular species of animals or birds, and putting in enhancement measures wherever we can. So I think the key is the early engagement and the involvement of the community.
Okay, thank you. Adrián.
Thank you, Cíara. Thank you, Antonella. Yeah, I was trying to give some answers on the chat, and the one from that data scarcity. Well, first of all, we give for granted the mitigation hierarchy, but in case you may face a situation where you have no spatial data, talking to the public, finding out about the potential use of nature-based solutions, where the symbolic species are important for them, which area, which ecosystem from knowledge, from a local knowledge perspective is most important. That's going to give you the answer you need in terms of data efficiency. So the principle of early engagement is key. And then that also, and I think it was this was for Pakistan. And then the question from Tanya, I don't know where Tanya are you from, but basically, which country are you from?
Switzerland.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this case, we have one example, which Antonella talked before about the designing at the very beginning, but we have reviewed an example from what happens when you put vegetation management as an example, and then you run some surveys and ask people, what do you think of your property? How do you see the value of your property versus a conventional management practice or versus IBM? And you see that the answers differ, of course, in terms of the people you ask to. So younger people may not have a say. Older people do have an appreciation for, let's say, more flowers. Not talking about floristic species, but more flowers, more vegetation, and that gives you perhaps the answers you would like to hear. So if you put these examples of running service and then referencing the service back into some sort of a spatial format, then that will allow you to plan better and adapt your future planning for new grids or for retrofits. And we have some examples, for instance, from the other side of the Atlantic in the US, which they have done done such practices, and they were very positive. And it's also cited in the white paper, by the way. And
For this
I think this
question,
is
yeah, but let's
yeah.
move to the other questions a bit later. Antonella, did you have anything to add on these questions?
Um,
The data was the data question.
Yeah, I want to jump in on the data question because data continues to be a big discussion point. So what we have been somehow advocating very mildly is to make data sharing compulsory. Because in a certain way, I hope you recognize that it's stupid that different actors collect the same type of data, and this is highly costly. So nationalizing data collection and data monitoring, I think, is a step which is very valuable anywhere in the world. This will reduce cost, it will give higher quality of data. Of course, you need data collection protocols because you need to collect data in the same way. However, I also want to add that it's clear that everything we do as humans has an impact on nature. But it is also clear that certain activities are more impactful than others. And if we want to be 100% sure that we have no impact, well, we will be late with many things. And we know that climate change, energy security, they are so important that we cannot wait for 100% security. And that's why the principle number 3, which is adaptive management, is super important because you learn while you do, you adjust, you improve, but you keep moving while you do, because otherwise we will miss all our targets and everyone will suffer much more. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Antonella.
So
I want to give Cíara an opportunity to answer the question on bird mortality monitoring and what types of line marking devices you use, if you can say it here. Also, I have to say we have a lot of questions already still lined up from previously. We will probably not be able to discuss them all in the next 8 minutes. So we will probably prepare a little paper that we will send around to all of the participants later at a later stage. So if you still have questions, feel free to reach out in the chat or at info@ginger.org. So Cíara, how do you carry out bird mortality monitoring?
And I think it's not just bird mortality, it's also just in general, we carry out a lot of proactive monitoring on bird activity all across our assets. And we have a system called Spotted, where our staff and contractors can report incidents, including collisions or unfortunately, if there's a death of an animal, that gets reported. And we also work with specialists like the RSPB and the Owl Trust and other agencies as well to support us, not just with dealing with mortality, but also with proactive, how can we avoid that particular species nesting on those particular assets so that we can keep them safe? What alternatives can we provide? And there is absolutely amazing amount of diversity. All of you will know a lot of the substations, they're very quiet areas. It's always full of wildlife. We do use bird diverters on Earthwire primarily, and we use diverters prioritized based on known flight path for existing and new assets. We always review that and we base that on the data. But there's genuinely real interest amongst our staff and contractors, and that's generally what helps us to protect those species all around our assets.
Thank you. I mean, there are some more questions, but I think we will address these separately. Adrián.
Oh, just it was a question about if there is any European level legislation for incentivizing grids as connecting corridors, and I would say that there is none right now. There is the European Nature Restoration Law, there is European Habitats Directive, and there are also the 10E approach. I would say that the most aligned within Europe, considering national grid in Europe as well, is the 10% gain, which is definitely setting the scene. And then also when you move into other countries, you may have like I think it's Germany and Tenet, that somehow they foster that there is some sort of like connectivity between these when you deploy grids. The example of stepping stones comes from a real experience in Spain, south of Spain, Almeria, where we have also it was the best grid award from RGI. I think it was in 2021. And basically, what they did is, setting some rocks inside the pylons, and that fostered the ecological connectivity of the pylon themselves for small mammals and smaller reptiles. That is also a practice that is being done in Austria by APG and other members from the RGI, let's say, community.
Antonella, you wanted to add something to that, or shall we move to the next question?
Yeah, just move to the next, otherwise we miss too many questions.
I think some has partly, Alex Torth's question has partly been answered, but he asked if there are any countries that explicitly require biodiversity enhancement or nature restoration around grid infrastructure. Is anything currently being considered at EU level in relation to this? And he or she, I'm sorry, is particularly interested in examples where these sites are regarded as ecological stepping stones, habitat corridors, etc.
So I can take some of it, but maybe Cíara also would like to. Cíara, just go ahead, and then I will add to your input.
Yeah, I just put something in the chat there about under power lines. So we're looking at that as an opportunity for us to use our footprint to make connections for nature. Like one of the things we've started with is not doing any kind of management of grass or any kind of cutting back under our towers. So we've started with that, and then we're looking at trying to make connections from one tower to another in terms of biodiversity, but it's not mandated for us. It's only mandated the 10% when it's under planning or consent.
Okay, thanks.
So there is part of the permitting process in Europe where mitigation and compensation measures are being requested in order to get the permits. On top of that, in Europe, we do have a restoration law, which is still in place, which actually allows for enhancement measures to be deployed. There is a restoration target, but of course, this is not strictly linked to projects, and there is a bit of a mismatch on how this is being handled. What is important to acknowledge that while there is a very strong trend in Europe and elsewhere, I would say mainly in the Western world for sure, to deregulate with the idea that this is making life easier for companies, project developers. There is also another side where a lot of project developers actually want the certainty, the legal certainty to operate. They want to build well, and so there is an increasing number of entities that are developing corporate strategies, like National Grid is also doing, to actually deliver high quality projects. And within these corporate strategies, there is a link to the restoration objectives. And I think we would need to have a separate webinar just for this, because it's a huge discussion that can be linked to biodiversity credits, to carbon credits. And so there is also a financial element to that can be explored to enable a faster deployment of certain measures.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adrián. We don't have much time left, and I'm afraid people are jumping off because they have other calls coming up. So I think we should close the discussion for now. I'm very happy that this is such an interesting topic. So we promise we will put something together for the questions that we have not answered.
Yeah.
Cíara, if you have a link to Spotted, this is asked in the chat. If you could still include this.
Yeah.
And yeah, on behalf of Ginger, thanks to my lovely colleagues, Adrián, Antonella, thanks to Cíara, and also support from Chris from National Grid. It was really great to have you. And
Thank you.
please have a look at our recordings on the other recordings. We have another one coming up in July on ecosystem services. So yes, looking forward to hear from you and reach out with questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.